To begin our conversation on adjusting and finalizing our layout, I want to mention, and you might know this already, but I at least want to mention that when we're constructing page layouts, there's a variety of techniques. There's a few different schools of thought. Some people, myself included, prefer what's referred to as a fixed width layout. In other words, if the size of the browser window changes, the layout does not flex or accommodate the changing of the size of the browser window or the screen size. Another school of thought is to create a flexible width layout, which is really sort of what we have here right now with the header and the footer, adjusting their widths automatically depending on the size of the browser window. That's another school of thought. A third school of thought is a combination of the two, which gets a little bit more complex. That's called a combination layout. In any regard, what I want to do here with you is I want to create what's referred to as a fixed width layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another div which is going to wrap all the way around our entire layout. And this guy will set the overall width for our entire page layout. Let's go and check it out. So I'm going to flip back to my code. And what I'll do inside the body area, just above the header div, is I'm going to go and insert this fifth div, if you will, open angle bracket, div, id equals, and I always call this guy master, because this guy's the master controller, if you will, for the entire layout. Okay, so go ahead and close that div. Now this closing div tag, I'm actually going to cut them, and I'm going to drop them all the way down below the footer. So in other words, we're creating, again, boxes inside boxes. So I have one massive box called master, and that master box contains 4 smaller boxes, header, menu, content, and footer, okay? So we created the div master, but we don't have an ID selector, a CSS rule to go with it. So let's go and create that. So just above my header ID selector, I'm going to go and create master, okay? Now, what's master going to do? What are the properties that I'm going to use for this guy? Well, there's actually only 2 properties that I want to set. The first one is going to be a width, as I mentioned previously. So the maximum width that I would want to set to accommodate modern monitor resolutions, modern browsers, things like that, is going to be 960 pixels, just like that. So then I save my code, I go back to my browser and refresh, and all of a sudden, my entire layout is now restricted to 960 pixels. So if I were to take a screenshot of this and open it up inside Photoshop and measure the width of the header would be 960 pixels. Okay? Wonderful stuff. All right, now that's all fine and well, and I could leave things as they are. That would be just fine. A lot of times, websites are built so that they sit way over on the left-hand side, way up in the top left corner. But again, that's kind of an older way of designing sites. Instead, what's much more modern is to create a centered layout. In other words, rather than having a massive gap of space over on the right-hand side, we have an equal amount of space on the right-hand side and over on the left-hand side. How do we do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set some margin on the master ID selector. So flip back over to your code, look for your master ID selector, and then let's go and throw in a margin. Now I'm going to use some shorthand here, pixels, so I don't want any space above or below my layout. Maybe you want a little bit of space, I don't know. And then for the left and the right, check this out. I really don't know what size browser windows, what monitor resolution the visitors to my site are going to use. So what I want the code to do, what I want the master to do, is to automatically figure out on its own how much space should be on the left and on the right. So I'm just going to throw in auto. In other words, figure it out for yourself. Refresh. There, that's what we want. So now we have an equal amount of space on the right and on the left-hand side of our overall layout. And now when I scale my browser window here, you can see that that space is going to collapse on the 2 sides of my layout. But if the browser window gets too small, eventually I'm going to wind up with some horizontal scrolling. Okay? But again, we're sticking with that 960, which is sort of the standard for modern browsers and modern monitor resolutions. Okay, last but not least, I want to take all of the content that we have on our page and I want to stick it into the main content area. This is the easy part. So I'm going to flip back over to my code and all of the content that appears below my divs. Ontario all the way down. If I scroll all the way down here, if it's going to let me, there we go. I want to grab all of this content, all the way down to just above the closing body tag. So all of this content, I'm going to cut it. Control or Command X. Get rid of that extra space. I'm going to go and find my content div, drop my cursor in there. Maybe I'll give myself a little bit of extra space and then paste. There we go. So we just pasted all of our content into that content div. Go and check out your browser, refresh. There we go, something like that. Now, it isn't perfect. Actually, you can see it's far from perfect. What's going on here? Well, we forced a height onto this content div, right? If I go back to my code and look for content, I'm forcing 300 pixels for the height. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that. I don't want to force a height. I want the content to determine the height of that content div, just like that. So pretty cool stuff. I hope that's working for you. You might be wondering about the menu here over on the side. Maybe it should extend all the way down to the bottom, all the way down to the footer, or maybe I'm going to put some banner ads there or something to occupy that space. You can adjust the height on this guy. What I'll do is I'll go back into my code and I'll look for my menu and I'm going to go and change my height. I'm going to change my height to 1066 pixels. How do I know it's 1066 pixels? Because I already figured out the value. So there you go. Now, the only other thing that you might want to do is you might want to throw some padding onto your center content div here. You can see the content is rubbing right up against the edges. I will leave that up to you. Don't forget whatever padding value you set, whether it's 5 or 10 on all 4 sides, you're going to have to subtract that value from the overall width. That ties back to our discussion on the CSS box model.